And it sounds cool.
Sounds good,
Good
mate.
feedback.
Sounds like you were lighting matches as a kid.
Anytime, Barton.
Burning toilet paper. You ever do that as a kid?
Never.
I was a firebug, mate, as a kid.
No, I never started fires as a kid.
Never, ever. I nearly burnt down 3 houses as a child. Me and my brothers, we built a cubby house across in a vacant block of land, and had a fireplace with all the stone, and I took the phone book from home and stole the phone book and some matches, screwed up all the paper, lit that thing. Within an instant, that went boom, straight to the top of the cubby house. The whole thing caught on fire. We dived out of there. On the outside, I realised I'd left my water bottle on the inside, and I dived back in to save my water bottle, came out. The guy whose house was next door, who saw the fire, got his hose out, started putting it out, and at the end he goes, "No, you guys go home, you've caused enough trouble as it is." And I'm going, "Well, it's still kind of smoking and smouldering." He goes, "Don't, Dave, you caused enough trouble, get home." I go home, my mum sends me down to Whale Beach store to get the milk, which is a 20-minute walk. So I'm walking to get the milk, and I hear fire sirens. And I go, "What the?" And a fire engine comes flying past, then another fire engine, then an ambulance, and the police. I'm like, "Oh no, oh no." And we run home, and that whole block of land that has a house on either side and a house there, and the whole block of land's on fire, and the whole side of this house is black. And I run and hide under the house, and I figure, I'm dead. My dad is going to kill me. And I get, my mum comes, finds me and goes, "What did you do?" And we were just at a cubby house, and she goes, "Oh, wait till your dad gets home." And I was like, "I know," and put us in separate rooms. And I heard my dad's motorbike coming down. I thought, "Oh, Mum," because that was back in the days where you copped them, you know. And I was like, "I'm dead, I'm gone." And my dad came in and said, "What did you do?" I go, "Well, I was," and he goes, "Don't ever play with fire again," and walked out. And I was like, "Oh, I got off the hook, pulled it. No way, is that it?" And I had to get a haircut. And that was maybe the last time I had long hair.
He must have had a good day at work or something.
He must have, mate, because I thought I was in serious trouble. But he was one of them blokes where you do a little thing wrong and it was a big deal, and you do a big thing wrong and it was a little deal, and you never really could figure that out. You never knew whether you're in deep shit or not. You know, it was one of those ones. We ready, PK?
Yeah, it was like an episode of Taxi Cab Confessions right there.
It was, eh?
Yeah, go ahead. Get us in.
Hello, peoples. Welcome to the Stoked Bloke Show. I'm Barton Lynch. We're coming to you from the Pipeline Studios here, a courtesy of a New Earth project. And today, very, very excited because I love snowboarding, I love surfing, I love skateboarding, I love standing sideways on boards. And today we have one of the best and the most legendary snowboarders of all time. Travis Rice is in the house at the Pipeline Studios.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Getting distracted.
Get distracted, mate. I know, and it's only 1 to 2 foot out there. Imagine what would happen when it's 10. You can't concentrate at all, mate. Welcome. You're here in Hawaii on a holiday?
Yeah, kind of like a little work holiday trip out here with a business partner of mine, and also took this like sweet window. Basically tomorrow we're like 1 month out before having our daughter.
Oh, right.
And
Congratulations.
so like the last little moment that we could be away, try to supercharge a little vitamin D and some island mana.
Before the winter kicks in. It's an exciting time of year for people who live the snow life, eh? With the snow starting to fall and not far off, eh? Till action.
I think it's similar to here, you know? Like
Yeah.
the first little bit of energy, you know, kind of is, you know, formulating, manifesting, everyone's getting their ducks in a row, you know, getting their stickers on their board quivers, and, you know, it's the same in the mountains. You know, you start to see white on the peaks as the storm comes through. Everyone's dropping films. Yeah, it's that time
Checking
of
the
year.
engine of the snowmobile.
Yes, if they're smart. The classic, like, ooh, I should have winterized it last year, but now I'm going to deal with it.
You do that toe surfing and you get it ready, and that's the day, and you go, "Oh, hold on. Oh, no, I wasn't prepared." In the snow, the consequences of that cold weather and that temperature and the exposure that you have as a frail human being in that environment, it's a big deal, eh?
You are at the mercy of the, you know, Mother Nature, the conditions, because it's so cold, and the days that you put in are so long in winter when you're going like remote backcountry to do it. You got to get your brown fat layer on, you know, all preseason, and it's tricky. You know, we as humans, where we normally would be in one place, climatizing to the coming of fall and the the season changing and our diets changing with it.
Yep.
And every day, getting like a little more chilled, a little colder, but it doesn't really happen
Progressively.
anymore because, I'm, tend to be actually,
You're in
normally
Hawaii
normally
before
I'm
it
in
starts.
Maui, like training for winter, and then you go straight into cold. And if you're not like, doing like cold hydrotherapy, building your brown fat layer, you're just instantly cold and not prepared for the weather.
Yeah, I know you grew up in Jackson Hole, and I suppose Wyoming, and I suppose that's like the North Shore is the mecca of surfing. That's one of the meccas of snow lifestyle in North America.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the kind of the hearts of where the variables have come together with the geography, the geology, and the temperature gradients, where we're at the Tetons, the amount of precipitation that gets scraped out of the atmosphere right there. It definitely, it's an area where kind of everything comes together. It is one of the mini meccas. We've kind of got our islands of, interior British Columbia, the coastal ranges, the Rocky Mountains, the East Coast even, right? There's mountain range on the East Coast of the U.S. But Jackson definitely holds a certain esteem.
Did you have a choice? I know your dad was a ski patroller.
Yeah.
And did you have a choice? Was it always going to be, you're on the snow and you're skiing from a really young age?
We always have a choice, whether we like to admit it or not.
Yeah, whether our parents like to admit it or not.
I mean, look, I grew up skiing. I grew up kind of a skier at heart. I like to joke because I didn't start snowboarding until I was probably 12. Out in Wyoming, kind of pre-internet and the modernization of everyone's kind of on the same page. We were always 10 to 15 years behind the curve.
Perfect.
Like, absolutely. Jackson was, an isolated little mountain town where it took trends quite a while to, like, penetrate in. And, snowboarding was a vast minority, and even more than that, I think the amount of snowboarders at the time when I was growing up, it was very few, far between. And, frankly, it wasn't until a few snowboarders had, aligned with the powers that be at the resort to actually build a few features. And I remember as a skier, the first time riding up a big transition, a quarter pipe,
Right.
just being like, what is this? This is fun. And, gave it a shot, tried it one spring, and that was it. That was the last time I skied.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Never put them back on again?
Not out of spite.
No, just absorbed.
I've had actually a buddy of mine, Sammy Carlson, who's a pro skier up in Canada. I traded him a number of years ago, like a board setup for a ski setup.
Right.
And I just have not drilled the skis out because I still have so much fun snowboarding.
Yeah.
I'm like, not today. I'm going snowboarding.
Is it? And tell us, for those that don't know, explain the differences in the eye of the ride. Like a skier to a snowboarder, do they see terrain differently?
I think that there's a certain, you do see terrain differently.
Does that come from surfing, you think, or a line that snowboarding has in the style and the way they're standing, or?
I think it comes in the fundamentals of like body position. Skiing, you have two edges.
Yeah.
Right, and you're centered up, and the way that you lean in, also the leverage point, right? Like the ski boot is in the middle of a ski.
Yeah.
Right, and so you have a lot of power and leverage side to side, but like forward to back, not so much. Like you can't really ollie on a ski.
I've seen those guys, they're leaning way back and they get up on the tail of their skis and they're wheel standing kind of down and it looks difficult to get it to that point.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, like skiing's a bit easier. Maybe not to learn. I think the learning curve on snowboarding is a little sharper than it is skiing, but from like kind of just after beginner all the way up to like underneath advanced, there's a much longer learning curve, I think, in skiing than in snowboarding. And with skiing as well, you have power. I mean, you'll see, like, if you watch professional skiing and snowboarding, skiers take way bigger airs. They are able to land flatter because they're squared up. They can utilize every, mechanical advantage of like the knee suspension system.
Yeah.
Now snowboarding, is obviously asymmetric. It's kind of got some challenging components when it comes to the mechanical advantages of utilizing the human body.
Right.
However, one of the beautiful components of snowboarding is you're able to really use the tail and the nose to ollie and take compressions, and then the art of the turn is something, and that's why I stuck with snowboarding, because skiing had become so commonplace. It was only like, if it was a 2-foot powder day, I was having fun. Otherwise, I was just up walking around. Like turning did nothing for me.
Right.
I got on a snowboard, and that like radial side cut, and continued to this day, the pursuit of the grace of a turn is really why I still snowboard.
Yeah.
And it's been that pursuit of laying it on edge, that single edge, and the amount of kind of nuance into the pursuit of the perfect turn.
I love that feeling, eh? When I found it extremely difficult. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever learnt. And quick story of how I first saw snowboarding. Remember the TB series?
Oh yeah, totally bored.
Right, totally bored. Aaron Chang, the photographer, was working with Mike Hatchett, and Aaron and I bought a house here at Sunset Beach in 1989 together. And so one winter I arrive at the house, and there's a VHS tape, TB1. And I've never really seen snowboarding. I've never paid attention. I'm so deep in surfing, and I bust out this VHS tape, and I'm like, what is this? And I put it in, and I see snowboarding for the first time. And Tom Burt and that whole thing, I was like, I've got to do that. I have to do that. I've got to go learn that. And so for the first couple of years, I'd go down and do a day or two. And I've literally had people sitting on lifts, looking down, going, not as easy as surfing, is it, mate? And they're all laughing and rolling while I'm eating it. And I don't know how many times I'd be flying along and think, this is the fastest I've ever. And things have flown everywhere. And I suppose that leaning to the back foot on hard pack was like a natural instinct. And to educate the body to stay forward and lean in from here and lean from that front was like it was the hardest thing I've ever done, to retrain my whole muscle memory of how to ride something. But once you got over that front foot, even on nice fresh groomer days, and you could lay that rail and go, I'm going to bottom turn over there, and stay in that compression, it reminds me a lot of toe surfing. It's the same feeling you get with the speed and the enormity of the environment around you that just makes it feel so good to sit on that rail. So that was my first introduction to snowboarding. What was yours? What was the first time you saw it? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was on a chairlift in Jackson the first time I saw it. Someone coming down, and I remember, I probably some pretty goofy gear, but I remember specifically, someone who was competent enough to make a couple like good-looking turns. Yeah. And that was the first time where I saw it and was like, oh, interesting. Like laying some trench, as we call it, like where you're actually a consistent turn where you're not scrubbing out at all. Yeah. A full carve, laying like a trench C in the mountain. That was the first time I was like, interesting.
I do that. I'd have to look back to see if I've actually, because you have a habit of doing that as a surfer too, not sitting on that rail and digging that trench. And when you do, the feeling's so different, hey? It's just such a different turn. You're like, oh, I think that was a real one. I think I just did a real turn.
Yeah.
I love it, mate.
And shout out to Aaron Chang. I got a beautiful print of his at my house. Out in Jackson, because when I built this thing called A Symbol, which was this, art and photography gallery company where it was like, the goal was to bridge, creators to appreciators, and we focused on some of the most prominent creators within, snowboarding, and we did some surf and some skate. But I bought one of his prints because his work with like all of the face mounts and stuff that he was doing, I bit some of what he was doing, and as a homage, I bought one of his prints.
It's been a long time. I hope you're good, Aaron. He is an incredible creative, and still is. And I think he's got his galleries going, and a lot of great things happening for him. The opportunities that have come for you from riding a snowboard. Do you sometimes kind of scratch yourself and go, wow, how's this life I've been able to carve out of sliding on the snow?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, it's snowboarding's been this crazy medium that has introduced me and given me the opportunity to pursue so many like furthered education, so many interests. I mean, into the world of like filmmaking.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the gateway to engineering and the building of like hard goods or designing of soft goods or more formulated opinions on worldly economics and geopolitical components, being able to travel the world and have conversations with people and understand a bit more of, I think, what everyone's essentially going through in life.
Yeah.
It's given me a more focused and educated narrative.
And is that because the discipline that came with wanting to be successful? Because that's such an advantage and opportunity, isn't it, to commit to something and to go through all of the ups and downs that it takes to succeed at anything and get to an end where you go, well, I think I did pretty good. It's so uplifting, gives you confidence, and then you start to take on more and more stuff, and you seem like one of those guys who isn't satisfied just riding the mountain. You have implemented and introduced so many ideas and concepts. It would seem that one of the latest, obviously, is natural selection.
Yeah, amen. I mean, look, it's been a grand adventure, and I'm like filled with gratitude with the amount of people I've been able to collaborate with over the years, and inevitably, the amount of failures that have led to like little gains in a myriad of topics. It's been a beautiful education, worldly education, and it's led to a number of things like you mentioned, like natural selection. In I think the creative process in bringing a weird idea into reality, that process of manifestation.
Yeah.
And throughout the years, and I think snowboarding was a great medium for me because you get to do that on such a small scale. From like, what if you moved your hand a little bit and kicked out your grab, and kicked your back foot out in a little way. Like that is a very small component of manifestation. Yeah. Like you think it, now let's see if we can bring it into the world. And I think with like, the creative freedom of adventure sport, it's a kind of a fast track, and I think that's why you have so many creatives within the space, and because you get to do these little things and you have these little successes, and then you start to like try it with bigger things, and then it's all of a sudden like a small little content project, and then it's a film, and then it's a product. And I think this series of opportunities that I've had in my life and the amount of amazing people I've been able to collaborate with have all led to, like the natural selection is a great example. The natural selection is a really grand idea. It's a really difficult logistical thing to bring into reality, but we've got such a great team of people, and we've done it the right way. I mean, the first event was in 2008 that we did.
It was that long ago?
Yeah, it was called the Natural Selection. We did it in Jackson Hole, actually. And then 2012, 2013, we did the Supernatural up in Baldface. And then kind of refined the process, and then we basically went back to the drawing board, and with my buddy Liam Griffin, who's our kind of COO, we tuned and took innumerable feedback from all of my peers in snowboarding, as well as the brand leaders and the people that were really trying to push this whole thing forward. And it kind of accumulated to this, like, okay, this is the thing that we're all working for. This is where snowboarding has been headed for 50 years, and no one else is doing it. So like, let's take a crack at trying to formulate what this thing is. What's the next step? And yeah, here we are going into our third winter now with the natural selection. It's exciting times.
And tell us, what are the premises that make it different to the traditional FIS or whatever type snowboarding events that existed?
Well, I think at the root level of, I would say, what the style is, it's essentially bringing freestyle into all mountain conditions, which has kind of always been a bit of the holy grail, because it involves a rider's lifetime experience from, drawing on everything from, riding park, like hitting kickers, riding transition in a half pipe, even like the creativity that comes with jibbing and street riding, as well as experience within the mountains, the ever-changing snow conditions, And so all of this factors into being a well-rounded rider on the natural selection tour, which it's how are you implementing creative and, bold lines, the lines and the routes you're choosing on the mountain, and then what kind of, freestyle components are you bringing to this like pretty, sometimes aggressive free riding terrain and conditions.
Yeah.
There is no like cap, there's no limiter, right? It's like with half pipe, and I will never put a cap on even like half pipe riding, but we've got a 22-foot super pipe. Like, I don't know if it's going to get any bigger. It's grown from 9 to 12 to 16, 18 over the years. Kind of gets boxed in. Kind of like a baseball field, right? Where there's a field, there's all of the rules that you have to abide by, and there's only so much you can do with it. Now, people are going to continue to figure out ways to like fine tune, refine, and be creative and put their own spin on it. But I think the beauty of, and I'm talking also, it's the same with surfing, right? Like what I'm talking about, but with the natural selection, there's a box maybe, but that is a loose and tattered, like, water sogged piece of cardboard. Like there's a ton of room
the
to continue to expand.
Yeah. Tell me, when you look at surfing, most of the kids grow up with aspirations around competition. And then as the competition bug, whether they've achieved it or not, they start to veer off into other directions, the free surfing thing, the big wave thing. It seems like snowboarding has similar sort of trajectory where they start out with those goals, and then big mountain backcountry stuff is something that comes after a competitive career.
Yeah, I think generally it's probably pretty similar, where the majority of riders that, go through the motions do it through competition.
Yeah.
But the beauty is, and I'm sure it's the same in surfing, is like there are these other paths.
Yeah.
And some people choose these other paths that inevitably get them to the same place.
Yeah.
But
their own form of happiness and contentment.
Yeah, and what's wild is a lot of these, I would say there's like minority riders that take their own path and are maybe a little less willing to conform and are a little bit more, I would say, confident in pursuing their own path, even though it's not the path that most have taken.
Yeah.
And I think there's some great examples of that with riders that are in the natural selection that did not have to go through the competition circuit.
Right. They got selected off the free riding, which is the basis of that, to put that creative element into the performance and interpret the terrain in your own way through your own experiences, and then show the judges that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And let's talk sustainability for a little while. I know you guys have a relationship with the New Earth Project, as I do, as the podcast does, as we sit here due to those guys. What are your goals on that front, and what do you see the opportunities in that snow environment? Obviously, it's an environment that takes a lot of resources to make stuff happen. Mm-hmm. So anything that goes on there is going to have an impact, you'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something that's a constant. It's constantly a part of the conversation, and I think the team behind natural selection, really, I would say the reason why we have such a passionate group behind it is it's probably culture first, in the sense that we all have, I think, gotten so much from this very dynamic and unique community, and see ourselves as in a bit of a unique position to help to further and keep it authentic.
Yeah.
In a world where so many of the authentic events and and companies continue to crumble in certain ways, and so I think it's like it's culture and people first, and then it's sustainability and really education. And a big focus for us is the educational components, because at the end of the day, people don't take care of what they don't care about. A big component, that we focus on is this kind of edutainment, and being able to bring awareness about, these cyclical cycles, for us in the mountains, right? The hydrology, like we're up operating in a pretty pure area, we're kind of at source, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, the process of,
If
snow
that
melting into the
yeah.
tributaries, into the ocean, and then, through the processes that water all evaporates, comes back to the mountains. And so we're kind of at this like purity source, which, however, in the last 5 to 10 years, it's, come to be shown that it's actually raining plastic particulate, even in, at, these microplastics, which they never thought were going to be, big enough to actually be taken up through
Into
evaporation,
the atmosphere, yep.
are now like, there's some
Coming back
studies
down.
in like the Rockies in Colorado.
Is that
and
right,
they're
mate?
and they're finding microplastics, because for
In the ice at first.
in the snow, in the snow, it comes
and
down
then-
in the snow because, for a snowflake to form, it needs a piece of particulate,
Yeah.
a piece of dust, a piece of
to
ash,
connect with, and
or a piece of plastic.
Yeah.
Without it, the crystal doesn't form. And so,
fascinating.
and so I think the educational components are a huge part. And we've had some amazing partners. Conservation International is, one of the big NGOs that we work with, and, A New Earth Project, and what they're trying to do back with like Atlantic packaging, and
Yes.
trying to just completely rethink, like, what, where are these, large problems in the chain?
Yeah,
and obviously
exactly.
packaging is got to be one of the
Oh,
biggest.
it's right up there. You talk about plastic,
I mean,
that's
it's
the
like, come on,
source, isn't
people.
it?
It's 2020. Like,
And don't allow companies to throw it out into the environment, and then it's everyone else's problem. And they're not even responsible at the end of that life of that product. They're not even responsible for what they've put into the environment. That's a travesty that obviously sort of signals some sort of collaboration between government and corporations at some point to go, hey, you guys can take care of that, and you can make the taxpayers pay for that, and we'll just keep making money off it. That has to end. And I suppose there's legislation that deals with that type of end of life for products, and hopefully, the corporations are made to be responsible for whatever they put out. They've got to be responsible for that end, and help us in that way, so that it's not everyone else's problem.
one of the many, completely disappointed components of,
Yeah.
like, how
We let that
failing
happen.
our government is, and just, the special interest component, and how, the corporations pretty much run our country.
In the 70s, when punk rock came around, I'm 14, 15, 16, and that music's just got its beat, and it's surfing itself at that point of time was anti-establishment and it's anti-authoritarian. It had its roots in that whole protest movements of the 60s, and that's why I loved it. Because it sat on that other side, and it stood for something outside, and you started watching governments and corporations and some of those organised religions, and you started watching the way things went, and you went, oh, this ain't good. And I've been watching them for 45 years now. And it's, it hasn't got any better. And the great part I think about now is at least it's more obvious. At least we all kind of have woken up to the fact that, hey, the thing's broken somewhere in there and it needs to be fixed. So that gives us hope and promise, right?
I totally agree, and I think, people don't, it's so easy to, I guess, be hypercritical of like where, iPhones and social media and all this, bullshit is taking it. Sure, we critique that all day, but one of the beauties is the fact that information now is pretty free to travel, and, it's becoming easier and easier for anybody to independently broadcast and independently share information. And I think that's probably the one component that I think it's why I'm recklessly optimistic about the future, is because I think, it's an old adage, but when everyone in the world can communicate, there will be no more war.
Well, you'd hope that you get to recognise that, hey, he's not such a bad bloke after all. I didn't need to go to war against them. We've got some similarities, and find there is that constant divisiveness that's being driven into society, isn't there, where you're being asked to take a side, whether it's Russia or Ukraine or whatever it is. You're always being asked to take a side. And I try my best not to take a side because I don't feel like I know enough to take a side. Those taking sides, I kind of sit there and go, well, do you think you know enough to actually take a side at this point in time? Who knows the good guys from the bad guys in this thing? You know?
Well, and if you look at it through the lens of empathy as well, it's like, dude, there is two sides. Like, there's horrible things happening on each side, and then there's, beautiful intentions with so many of the people on both. It's just...
And then you get on the chairlift or you paddle out into the surf, and all of a sudden you're just free. and all of those things have washed off, and you're in that moment, and you're forced to be in that moment because of the consequences of what you're doing, and that ability to be absorbed in what you're doing. Do you love that? Do you love that depth of connectivity that you have with what you do?
I mean, it's when, that purpose, like the feeling of relief and purpose, like, get out of the water, or, big day getting out of the mountains. It's like, there's a purposeful component and an ideal of like living the life that we're meant to and lucky enough to live, because it's taking that, radical responsibility, which really is freedom, right?
Yeah.
Like, you go out into the mountains with a couple friends of yours, like you are operating as a team, and you are at the mercy of your own decision making.
Yeah.
And that's freedom.
That's a beautiful thing, man.
And back to what you were saying earlier, I think to circle back on the sustainability component, like I would want to give a shout out to, the real ingenuity from a number of companies and people, like Wes and like New Earth, where it's like, all right, like you guys aren't going to figure this out. Like you can't figure this out with policy. Well, fuck you guys. We're going to figure it out through a business model that not only is constructive and works and becomes a reason for companies. And there's a lot of companies out there where, they're barely making it. And so sometimes they're forced into a position where like they can't, the thing is 10 cents cheaper.
Yeah.
And like, I'm only making 5% margin on this thing. I'm barely scraping by. And so I have to choose this like shitty option for packaging and whatnot. And so with like what New Earth's doing is trying to rewrite it where, hey, there's now actually a nearly identical price point option for a sustainable packaging. Which do you want to choose?
Yeah, it's just a no-brainer.
So that's the companies that are building smart business and, bringing along new ethical, advantageous takes on business.
Yeah.
Like those are the true punk rock.
Yeah, that's it.
individuals.
Anarchistic. Tell me, you love the ocean? You like surfing?
Snowboarding gets in the way of my
surfing.
surfing.
Yeah. But because the reason I ask and where I was going to go is, as I understand it, you sold John the boat that we see John sailing the high seas on. That was your craft before his?
Yeah, man. It was
Tell us a little bit about that story. How did you end up with the boat? What was the goal? What did you want to do with that thing?
Well, I fell in love with the ocean and surfing especially. I had little, tidbits of experience with the ocean. I grew up landlocked in Wyoming, but was always so fascinated because I didn't grow up next to it. Definitely didn't take anything for anything for granted with the ocean. And so being able to go down Southern California and like learn in the summer, onshore wind chop for a number of years, slowly start to figure it out. And then I remember doing like my first trip, first point break I rode, and was like, oh, this is what it's like, after summers and summers
of just going,
of Southern California. But no, I fell hard in love with surfing. And in the meantime, I had been learning how to sail. My dad and I kind of have been learning to sail at the same time. We had this little 24-foot trimaran out of Florida and sailing all around the Bahamas. And my dad was he's a fly fishing guide too, adventure guide, and he loves to bonefish. Yeah. And so we would just be remote Bahamas for 3 weeks, just sleeping out on the net out in the middle of nowhere. And so then there came a time where I was like, oh man, if I could, got my first surfboard on that little boat, scored a couple little scrappy waves in Bahamas, and then I was like, all right, I need to make it to the South Pacific. And so, 6 years, working, snowboarding career, doing that, and then also looking around trying to figure out like the boat that I could buy on the East Coast, where all the boats were, and then sail it to the South Pacific. And the boat that I always dreamed about getting, it's a company called Gunboat that just happens to make like probably the most eloquent catamarans in the world, also priced that way. Right. So I always looked for 5 years on like, what is the boat that's closest like that? Because there's no way that I'm going to be able to get one of those. Yeah. And I think it was like 2009, right after the financial crisis, and people are having to like let go of assets, and somehow, got this dream boat, and ended up, spending 8 years sailing it.
8 years, fantastic.
Basically 4 or 5 months every summer I would just live on the boat. Learned the ways of the water, and it was a magical experience. Put an amazing amount of time and effort into refitting it and getting it equipped for like truly remote surf missions and expeditions. You could be months away from port, and kind of that chapter of my life moved through, ended up in French Polynesia, and bumped into John because he was down for some WSL events in Tahiti, and we were chatting, and he was looking for a boat, and I had a couple friends and resources, and he was trying to figure out, same deal, what type of boat to get, and then in the end it just ended up working out that he felt that boat that I had kind of ticked a lot of boxes, and my 3-year permit to have the boat in French Polynesia waters was coming up quick. I didn't want to leave, but I had to take it out there, and it just worked out, and we had a handshake deal, and I sailed it up to Hawaii, and it was truly like, it was my divine honor to be able to hand over this craft for its next chapter, and the fact that the time and energy and intention I put into it for what it was meant to do, being able to hand it off to John and his team. He's got such an amazing group of people that he's with, and for it to be like, okay, this next chapter is going to be a whole nother level from like what we did. It was a really beautiful exchange.
And the boat gets to continue living its purpose as well, isn't it? It looks like those guys appreciate it so much. I know they're down in New Zealand at the moment, traveling around down there, and they've done a bunch of upgrades, and he's such a he's a beautiful sailor, like very into all like the performance components, and obviously a guy like him at his level of craft is very perceptive, right? When you have to take into considerations like weather, wind, forecasting, where are we going to anchor this? Where's the current? So, a lot to deal with, on a boat.
Yeah.
A lot of exposure to potential problems, but I suppose the two of you guys are kind of kindred spirits in that sense, Snow to the ocean, and similar positions of respect and authority in those cultures and those sports, and couldn't have landed with a better person, I wouldn't think.
Oh, no, absolutely not. To have essentially, shared the same lady at this point.
Yeah.
With that beautiful vessel.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing, Mum. So, and it's one of those things, when we did surfing back in the pro sport started in 77, the first, 76, They pretended they ran a tour, and at the end of the year they nominated a world champ based on the results. But no one knew that was going to happen. And then they took a trophy at the Outrigger Club and said, here, hold this thing, took some photos and said, we've got a world tour, we've got a world champion, Peter Townend. Wow. And then 77 it started. And my first year was 83. So really, in that sense, you were very close to those formative days, and you surfed against that very first generation of people. And it was always like being at a big family with not enough food at the table. And you had to get in and get your food, mate, or if you were going to starve if you didn't get in and fight for your food. No one was giving you any. There weren't scraps, there weren't leftovers, there wasn't enough to go around. And so we lived like that, and our dream was always, our responsibility for our generation. Those guys created it, the generation before us, Mark Richards, Sean Thompson, Rabbit Bartholomew, Dane Keelow, Michael Ho, that generation. And then our job was, they were still fighting that beach bum, no-hoper, drug-taking, loser, concept that people had of what surfers were. And maybe in a lot of ways it wasn't that far from the truth in a lot of cases, but our job was to make them believe that we were a sport and that we were athletes and that we were worthy of an income and worthy of a job and not having to get a real one. And that was, so we went to work doing that. And now you look at the opportunities that exist for people like John, and the advantages and the way that they've been able to seize what was built and create a dream lifestyle is amazing.
Well, and I think what we're talking about, John, like he's also a great example of someone who, I think it seems cares deeply about the culture, and I think not knowing the ins and outs, but with like what he's done with Florence Marine, and the fact that a big motivation of that was to do it right and to do it in a way that he wanted to do, that he wasn't seeing happening with like previous partners and sponsors of his. And I think there's a number of people like that across the full spectrum, from like skate, snowboard, and people that have taken this beautiful life that has been co-created with these communities and these cultures, and have decided to put a bit of that effort into functional businesses or movements or nonprofits that circle back into this again, the circle
feed the
of
thing that gave them a life, really, in that sense.
Yeah. And so I think I've really found a lot of joy in those kind of components. And you asked me earlier what I was doing over here. I'm actually I'm staying with a business partner of mine, this guy Ian de Correz, on this company called Cindy that we launched a year ago. And it's basically an online marketplace for like buy, sell, rent, like gear, used gear. And when we sat down like 3 years ago with Cam Zink and kind of mountain biker and kind of formulated what this thing was, it was like, back to the sustainability piece, it's like, this is potentially like one of the greatest impacts on being able to like upcycle and keep gear in rotation, and also brings this component of like lowering the barrier of entry, because in snowboarding it's pretty aggressive, the amount of gear and equipment you need to do it, not to mention a lift ticket.
That's what I was about to say, not to mention the lift ticket.
I mean, you got $300 lift tickets now in the mountains. And where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
Like if anyone's super motivated, like never let the cost of entrance be a barrier. Because some people will be, it's too expensive. No, some people make it happen. You go clip tickets in the parking lot. You go hustle for gear. You work at the resort for a pass. Like there's totally ways.
You find those ones where you can jump in the car, drive up to the top, walk that little bit over there, and then drop the resort, and your mate picks you up in the car and takes you back around. We did that one up in Tahoe a couple of times, and whatever it took, mate.
Well, yeah, and so like. The community and equipment has been really kind of detached, and this healthy decades old model of like the shops being these kind of hubs of culture, which there's a few of them are still clinging on in certain areas, but it's tough out there. And so with Cindy, it's like the goal was really to bring this kind of marketplace back, where you're getting more value out of your equipment, and it's circling back to okay, so the previous idea of let's take a snowboard jacket, I can buy this like, pretty scrappy, shitty jacket for $150, $200 that is going to last me a season, right? Or I could spend $400 or more on this like 3-layer nice gore that's going to like last for years. And now with like this marketplace like Cindy, it's cheaper to take the more expensive option and then sell back at 60% of your, income back if you need it. And the upcycled life, the energy it takes to create, outerwear and boards, it's substantial. And so what's like the biggest impact you have? Get more life out of those goods.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Talk about more life. What does your life have? What are you thinking? What are you dreaming? Where do you want to see yourself in the next decade?
I'm only looking a month ahead right now. Bringing a daughter into this world, having another baby. My partner Brooke and I, we've got a 2.5-year-old that has been absolutely frothing on the beaches here the past couple days.
I see the tide pool out there too. They're perfect for the kids.
Oh yeah, he was swimming in it yesterday. And continuing to support this natural selection, like adventure. We have an amazing mountain biking event coming up, I guess in a few months, that we're getting ready to announce. We just announced the full, tour for natural selection, and we got this whole global duels like qualifying series that then goes into like 2 full live event days for like our main event up in Stoke. And then, beyond that, frankly, I've had so much fun working with a few of the companies that I work with on continuing to update and bring more incredible equipment to the market, because I love tooling on the product.
Right.
Because some people look at like the modern, snowboard and binding setup, and it's like, oh, it's amazing. Compare it to what you see 30 years ago. I think a few of us look at it and are still like, oh man, there's still so much room to grow.
Yeah, right.
There's a long way to go here still.
Yeah.
So that's been a really fun passion project of mine.
Yeah, nice to be actively engaged in the development of equipment. People, surfboard design has got so much opportunity to play, and things tend to sort of cycle around, and you see, people go, that's the first of this, but it was something that happened before that influenced that time. For you, when you grew up, who were your major influences? Who were the people when you were a young Travis Rice with dreams of being a professional snowboarder or living this life? Who did you look up to?
I think early on, I was pretty focused on my local zip code.
Yeah.
And guys like Brian Iguchi,
Yes.
who you probably know, Lance
TB.
Pittman, Brody Dowell. There was a kind of cool core community that rode in Jackson, and then I had the pleasure to apprentice under some of them, and especially Brian Iguchi for many years. Learned backcountry safety from him. Learned, some takes on philosophical points, from a worldview, taking a lot out of it. And, moving on from that, I think, guys like Terry A. Hawkinson, for example, in snowboarding, who, one of the greatest to ever strap in, still one of the greatest. But for me, it was his ardent effort at trying to make and leave it better than he found it. He put forth a noble effort in something we called the TTR, Ticket to Ride Tour, which at the time it was unifying all the best independent events around the world, really headed in the right direction. It was what snowboarding needed. He had an event called the Arctic Challenge up in Norway, which was legendary. Being able to go to that event, we'd always go up, ride at that event in Norway, and then at the end of the trip, you had the option to go out and do this trip up to Lofoten. And there's a famous bay, surf bay, up in Lofoten, and I remember I've gotten a few chances to surf it while it was pretty good during those trips. But he just did an amazing thing trying to help the snowboarding culture. So he was a big motivator.
Bit of a Kelly Slater of snowboarding of sorts, Terrier?
Yeah.
Seemed like that at the time. Similar sort of timing, and it seemed like they were kind of almost like kindred spirits breaking new ground together.
Yeah, 100%. Terrier is on another level. There's no one I've run into in my life that's more punk rock than that guy. People don't think of him as punk rock, but
No.
that guy,
Really?
that guy's a rock star.
Snowboarding, where do you see that going? Where do you, as a culture, as a lifestyle, does it still have that punk rock element to it?
Yeah, I think it does, but I think it's evolved, right?
Yeah.
I think, we're not like a counterculture sport anymore, right? We're not banned on multiple ski resorts across the country where it is this kind of punk rock thing. No, it's it's gone somewhat mainstream, and there's a cycle that happens. And I say, I have gratitude for the forefathers that come before us that did gloriously screw up, that were blatant alcoholics, that did have drug problems, because you know what, all that stuff, it taught the younger ages what to do and what not to do. 100%. I don't want to end up like that guy. And so I think as it also has become more multi-generational, where now you have families that shred together, you have 3 generations that shred together. I think
Sitting on the chairlift together.
Yeah, I think it's headed in a beautiful place. It's going to continue to have some challenges. Of course, the industry, as a whole, across the board, there's generally less resources. Most of the companies, even core companies, have all tried to claw back a little bit of their own business models, whether they're still private or they're owned by some holding company that is extracting, more profits out of them. There's less money for athletes. There's less money for projects. There's less resources to put back into the culture. And so these are all the realities. However, the will and spirit of the craft itself is still shining strong. and there's so much opportunity for those that want to be creative on their take on how they do these things. And so that is really, continues to motivate me completely. And I actually want to ask you a question because, we went to the Olympics, and the Olympics, it's just whatever, what a gong show. But I think you maybe know, the first year that snowboarding went to the Olympics in Japan, it was for half pipe and racing as well, but it was for half pipe. And essentially there was like a rainstorm, and so they canceled all of the skiing events, all of the ski racing events, and the only thing they could do that day, they're like, all right, well, let's make the snowboarders ride the half pipe. Let's get that thing out of the way.
Literally in the rain.
In the rain, terrible conditions, and snowboarding looked horrible, on that Olympics. It wasn't until it went to Salt Lake the next year, and then it was like perfect conditions, and the world got to really see. And then, of course, the snowboarding ratings for the Olympics, I think, were maybe just underneath, figure skating or something. It was like the highest rated show. And the Olympics sees that. And what's the Olympics? I mean, there's a lot of beautiful things that come with the Olympics. I don't want to completely bag on it because there are amazing things. I mean, it pushes athletes to, commit their lives and put 4 years into training and getting ready so they can, be the best that they've ever been. There's a lot of beautiful things that happen with the Olympics, but let's be real, the Olympics is a TV show. It's about ratings. And so they've continued to, look to the X Games, and they're like, these guys have such higher ratings than us with these new age sports. So we need to get those things in the Olympics. And, surfing, right? Surfing. And for us, big, the Freeride World Tour is a tour that's focused on free riding. In a kind of a more extreme manner than what we do at Natural Selection, but they have skiing and snowboarding, and the FIS is an organization that actually just acquired the Freeride World Tour, and so they're going to be making probably an Olympic bid, 2030 or something, for free riding to go into the Olympics, and so it's the same deal where it's an interesting dynamic to see what's going to continue to happen because let's be honest, FIS has a pretty terrible track record of catering to the community and the culture of these sports they get themselves involved with, especially adventure sport, which I think they just fundamentally don't understand. But I probably too much to get into on the show, but curious, how it's been for surfing with this last Olympic cycle and some of the takeaways.
It's such an interesting thing because at a point, the Olympics need us. Mm-hmm. Essentially, surfing, 100%. Snowboarding, skateboarding. We don't necessarily need them. We've existed without them. But when I got to commentate Tokyo, the surfing Olympics, the first one, and that sense of people coming together from around the world in the name of sport was in a COVID Olympics where it's all masks and testing every few days and people in their rooms on their own and that whole separated environment. I still felt it. It was still a wonderful sense of, all these countries coming together and the fact that there's all these different levels. It's not just the best. It's all these different levels of people coming together and it sort of broadens that base and that acceptance of the sport. So I feel like the Olympics very quickly, while at first I was like, well, I wasn't that concerned about it. I thought they needed us. We didn't need them. But very quickly it became obvious that to the surfers it was really important. To the WSL, it was super important, and all of a sudden it very quickly became something that you recognised as being more important than maybe everything else. And the Olympic gold's the thing. And so it's really, it's elevated itself to a place in our sport extremely quickly, where you go, wow, it's important. It means a lot. And to see that wall in Honolulu there of Juka Hanamoku and Carissa Moore on the side of a building together, and you go, wow, it means a lot. It unifies. It's such a powerful thing outside of the commercialisation, all those other elements of any business or any project. I felt it when I was there, and I feel like surfing in general has embraced it and really likes it and loves the idea. And WSL, as the FIS counterpart in our world, ASP into WSL, has constantly and most often been described the same way you described FIS, as not being as culturally connected, not really understanding certain things about the culture and having its own commercial agendas and stuff, and that's stealing the soul of the thing out of it a bit. So it's interesting that the organisations that are for it specifically seem to have a disconnect somewhere with the culture and their agenda, and then the Olympics, though, seems to be able to kind of float a little bit through stuff, and because of its enormity, it's accepted.
Well, look, I mean, I stay recklessly optimistic, but man, the amount of olive branches that have been sent, in a one-way direction over the years, over the decades now, I think that they could turn the tide on certain components if they just, refocused a little bit and just shared some of the resources or prioritized the fact that, hey, like there's a lot going on here and this is not something to just be taken from.
Yeah.
Got to give back.
Got to get back. And hence what we're doing here, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Stoked Bloke Show.
Yeah.
And congratulations on all that you do. I know at a New Earth project, all of us are super excited to be aligned with natural selection. And I've watched it many times just online, and it's a fantastic concept because it's just fresh, it's new, it shows snowboarding in a different way, and outside of the constraints of an organisation, a sporting organisation. So brings that freedom and that love of the culture and the sport to the public. So we appreciate that. We appreciate you. And maybe we should go have a surf one of these days while you're here.
Dude, I'm your stoked bloke in training right here. So.
Thank you, people. Thank you for joining the show. Thank you, Travis, for joining us. And there's going to be more coming your way. But keep an eye out for Natural Selection and Travis Rice, one of the greatest legends to stand sideways on a board in the snow ever. And we appreciate having you on. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Too young for the L word, but I'll take it. Thanks.